Hey, now this is the the video where I'm going to take you guys how I like to construct my tournament lineups. It's a lot different than how I like to do cash lineups because like I talked about at the first lecture of this section, playing tournament is riskier. So you have to basically eliminate parts of the field, and in order to eliminate a lot of people from the field by differentiating yourself, you have to pick contrarian sleepers. You have to stack. You have to do a lot of different things with your roster construction. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up DraftKings and start walking you guys through how I like to create my tournament lineups. And I've had some pretty good success with tournament lineups. So just follow along and I'll show you guys how it's done. So as you guys can see here, I've just gone ahead and selected the Millie Maker on DraftKings. So let's go ahead and dive into roster construction. Now with the Millie Maker, you really need to be conscious of people in the media, pundits, who they're kind of picking this week as their picks of the week, their sleepers of the week, because you immediately know not to play those guys because 30% of the field's going to play them, and it's just going to be a bloodbath if those guys blow up in your face. So unless the people you're talking about are necessary for your lineup, go ahead and turn the other way because they're just going to be too highly owned. Now, I always start off my tournament lineup with a contrarian defense. Always. Defense is such a random, it's so arbitrary because even if they hold a team to no points or a few points, they could have a great game on paper and in real life, but in fantasy, you need like a touchdown return, and you just cannot predict that stuff. So I never spend up at defense, but I always start off my rosters with the defense. A cheap defense that's at a plus matchup against a weak offense, and usually at home. So let's go find a defense. And I just start scrolling down. And it's usually I usually like to do the same defense, cash and tournament. So I'm going to go ahead and pick the Chargers. For those of you who watched the cash game lineup construction, I'm going to pick the Chargers. They're going to be a low-owned defense. They're playing a really, really bad quarterback in Josh McCown with a really bad offense in Cleveland, and they're going to be at home. So I like their floor. And they have and Josh McCown's known for being inconsistent. So if they start putting pressure on McCown, it's going to be lights out, and he's going to start throwing picks for the Chargers defense to get points off of, and then hopefully return for touchdowns for even more points. So really like the Chargers defense, special teams in this game. That's my defense. So, and you can see how picking a really cheap defense starts affecting your average remaining salary per player up here. You want to have a lot of flexibility with your higher play picks. Now, let's go. And then once I pick my defense, I always pick my stack. Who is my QB slash, who's my QB wide receiver stack this week? And I never like to spend too much on a QB if I don't have to. But what's becoming tricky is that a lot of people are especially on DraftKings where QBs are more mid-priced across the board, people have started figuring out that you go down for a quarterback. Tyrod Taylor is becoming super popular. Andy Dalton is going to be really popular after a huge week. So I might spend up at quarterback, and I think that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go grab think I'm going to do the Aaron Rodgers, Randall Cobb stack because Randall Cobb's at a decent price point for a really highly targeted receiver who just came off a massive week. I think Randall Cobb's going to be highly owned, and Aaron Rodgers might be, but I also think that it won't be so. I think they'll probably be in that like 15% range. And I'm making this in the middle of the week, so I might change it up as news comes out and it gets closer to game day. But this is what I'm going to go with right now. So I spent up really big at QB. Don't normally do that, but I'm going to do that this week because I think that, I think that's just the way to go. Another option would be to do the Andrew Luck, Dante Moncrief. You know what? In fact, I'm going to do that. Let's switch this up. I'm going to do Andrew Luck and Moncrief stack, which gives me a lot of flexibility elsewhere, having that $5,000 receiver. Andrew Luck has not been a stellar quarterback. I think he's got a really nice matchup at home against Jacksonville. And, he's so expensive that people aren't going to want to pay up for him, especially after 3 below average or below expected performances. So I like this as a stack. So after I pick my defense, after I pick my stack, I like to go ahead and pick really cheap running backs if I can find good options. So this week I really, really like one guy in particular in tournament lineups, and that's Melvin Gordon. Now, Melvin Gordon last week was a highly hyped up guy on the media. Twitter, blogs, ESPN blowing up about Melvin Gordon. They thought he was going to have a great week. But he was on the road at Minnesota, who's got a good run defense. It just wasn't going to be a good game for him. And I faded Melvin Gordon last week to great effect. He had a horrible game. But this week, after all that hype and the huge letdown, people are not going to pick Melvin Gordon at a $4,900 price tag. I think that's cheap enough where he can be considered a sleeper and provide a lot of value. So I'm going to pick Melvin Gordon at home against Cleveland, where I think San Diego is going to get up early, and game flow is going to really help out Melvin Gordon because they're going to want to get the rookie some good work. So I'm going to pick Melvin Gordon. Now this is where the triple stack comes in. If I pick Frank Gore at home against Jacksonville, who is coming off a good week, he might be pretty highly owned. He might be in that 10% range, but I think the combination of Moncrief, Gore, and Andrew Luck is going to be almost non-existent across the board. So I'm going to go ahead and pick Frank Gore. Now, it gives me 2 cheap running backs who have a lot of high upside and who are not going to be highly owned, especially Frank Gore in this stack. Now, that gives me some room to play with my wide receivers and flex. It's not as much room as I like. Usually I like to even go cheaper on my running backs. So there's a good argument for fading Melvin Gordon and going to Carlos Williams from the Bills at home against the Giants. So if I go Carlos Williams, I get even more room to play with on my wide receivers tight end area. I think I like this because Frank Gore Moncrief Luck stack is not going to be highly owned. In fact, like I said, almost non-existent. So if those 3 guys blow up, then I'm in the conversation to take home the Millie Maker. Now, obviously, if they all flop, I'm going to be in trouble. But that's why I never do one tournament lineup. I usually do 10 to 20 tournament lineups per week in order to give myself enough diversification across the board. Now I've started to pare that back a little bit and refine my process down to about 5 to 10 lineups. Because if you play 20 lineups, even if you do cash in a couple of your tournaments, you have to cash really big in one of your turns to pay off all of them if you're paying in the higher, if you're playing in the like $20 range per game. So but I always diversify. But back to this roster. So I have the triple stack, which is super unpopular, with a Carlos Williams, who's going to be more highly owned. He's super cheap, and LaShawn McCoy, the guy who's ahead of him on the depth chart, is out. So I think Carlos is in for a big week. And I'll eat the chalk on Carlos. Now, because DraftKings is PPR, I like to have two really good wide receivers. I love really good wide receivers because you get that if they're going to get 14 targets a game, you have a floor of like 10 receptions, which is 10 points, and that is also coupled with yards. So I want to go and get a pretty decent tight end this week. So I think at the tight end spot, I'm going to go with a guy like, I think you have to go with, I think Travis Kelce at 5,300 is a good option. He didn't have that great a week last week, so people aren't going to own him as much. He's at a nice price point. It gives me a lot of flexibility to jump up to on some receivers. And then, from here on out, you got to get really selective. Do I go with a Jimmy Graham, who's a target monster, and that gives me two $7,500 receivers to play with. And what just happens to pop up is Randall Cobb and A.J. Green. I think A.J. Green's going to have an absolutely huge week. KC's defense got decimated against Green Bay. They don't have any corners anymore, so they can't cover a guy like A.J. Green. But we're still in the roster construction, so don't pay too much attention to the names and the matchups right now. Let's go back and review the construction of this lineup. I have a cheap but promising defense that people aren't going to own. The Chargers have not been that strong this year, but they're at home playing a really weak offense. So start with a cheap defense that no one's going to be on. Then I pick my stack. I had Andrew Luck, Dante Moncrief. So then once I pick my stack and my defense, I go get my running backs. And I never spend up at running back unless it's like Le'Veon Bell or Jamal Charles. Because running backs get less passes, therefore their floor is a lot lower because they're not getting those PPR points from receptions. So I got two promising running backs who could have monster weeks, but they're super low price. So even if they don't have a monster week, let's say they only go for 20 points. Let's say they go for if they're in the 17 to 20 range, I'm happy because they're still paying off their value. They're still providing value, and they're giving me freedom down here to have really good receivers who are going to get those PPR floors. I really encourage people who ask me about DFS, mostly my friends, to make sure you never have too many running backs in your DraftKings lineup because receivers just have such a higher floor. And in tournaments, maybe these guys don't end up blowing up for 40 and you don't take home 1.2 million, but they're not going to blow up in your face and lose all your money for you. I think it's important to have a high floor, which is another contrarian thought process that I take into tournaments. A lot of people just say, pick the sleeper. I say, yeah, sleepers have value, but have a good floor because even if you're not in that like thousand, even if you're not making $1,000 on the tournament, at least you're getting your money back plus a nice return. So having that triple stack ensures I have enough diversification from the pack, but I also am eating chalk on AJ Green, Travis Kelce, Jimmy Graham, Randall Cobb, like those, and Andrew Luck. Like those guys are pretty chalky plays, but them together in the lineup with a triple stack is really contrarian. So I think this is actually a really good lineup. I'm actually gonna go ahead and play this lineup. Hey, there's your first free insight into how I construct my lineups for the Millie Maker. I hope you guys really followed me along. If you have questions about roster construction, Feel free to hit me up on Twitter at Il Guido. It'll be all over at the. I'll have all this information at the end of the lecture. So that's it for my tournament roster construction lecture. I'm going to move into research and game breakdowns in the next section. All right, y'all. See you later.